Hello everyone and welcome back to Pauper News. So it's been a while since the last time, mostly because there wasn't anything relevant for the Pauper format. The format and metagame seemed stable and nothing new appeared. But science next week there will be the Paupergeddon in Rome, which went sold out in I think 3 or more hours, and it sold something like 350 tickets. Then after a couple of weeks they got more room, so they rented another room in the hotel where they're holding the event, but that's still only 400 people allowed, and also there was a waiting list, so probably a lot of people didn't get the chance to get a ticket for the event. But regardless of that, there's also another event that I think it may be important for us Pauper players, and that's the November 12th on Saturday Pauper qualifier, which get you an invitation for a regional championship round 2 on tabletop, so not Magic Arena. And for that reason, I just wanted to make a little recap on how the metagame is going and what you may likely to face, and eventually what you may like to play in these two separate events. Well, let's take a look at the MTG Goldfish front page from the Pauper metagame. First, we see that the 4 must play decks are Azir's Killgate, Dimir Tempo, not a control deck, is a tempo deck, or an aggro control deck, whatever. Affinity, in form of the Grixis Affinity list with Metallic Rebuke or Counterspell, so basically counter Affinity. And then there's Cool Data Burn. I think that is important also to note that at least in the Pauper Italian metagame, I'm expecting a lot of Mardu Metacraft and Burst Metacraft with Experimental Synthesizer and Korsky. A lot of Italian players truly love Boris. They always loved the Boros deck with Glame Toke and Korsky Fisher because it's a mid-range style deck that can kill the opponent with the burn damage from Galvanic Blast, Lightning Bolt. Originally, they were also playing cards like Firebolt, but I mean it was something like in 2014, and right now they have more reach in form of cards like Makeshift Munitions. The most annoying part of this deck is that it's truly slow, at least the Mardu version, which was promoted first by Heisen01, which is the Italian player Mirko Shata, who is also part of the Pauper format panel. He was able to get in a couple of top 8s of relevant Pauper events with his list. But okay, it has much more card advantage compared to the Boros version thanks to Deadly Dispute, and it also ran Cleansing Wildfire, which is basically a land that gives you an extra card in hand, which can be considered a good thing, also because you can destroy one Basilisk Gate. But I think that this list is kind of weaker compared to the Boros one, mostly because they don't have enough pressure to end a game enough fast, and most times and most matches, at least in tabletop Magic, you can't just win and you draw the match. So for that reason, you may prefer the Boros deck with the Seeker of the Way, not necessarily Ledger Birth, because I don't think that Ledger Birth is so much great right now. Well, against Burn maybe is good because they also play Ledger Birth, but generally speaking, the first Boros Monarch deck that were running Experimental Synthesizer, they were also running Seeker of the Way and Culture Bird because they were also playing Rally the Pheasant in 2 copies usually. And usually you don't want to flip Rally the Pheasant with Experimental Synthesizer, so that's the reason why I never liked Rally the Pheasant. But whatever. Also, the Mardu version is kind of weak on the top deck if you consider that Experimental Synthesizer flip randoms cards, and the Mardu version is more control-ish compared to the Boros version because they specifically run the black to play more card advantage and also more removal spells, in example Generous Edict or the classics Journeys Nowhere. And well, the Mardu version is probably better against the Dimir Tempo deck because they have better answers to their creatures, but they are kind of weaker when Dimir Tempo deck doesn't have enough pressure of the battlefield, and if they aren't able to put too much pressure on the battlefield, they may lose in the mid-late game due to double or triple 5/5 creature landed at once. Well, anyway, from my point of view, this deck is a classic soup that try to run a lot of different kind of answers to different archetypes, and if you aren't able to throw them at the right spot, you inevitably aren't able to play a game good as your opponent. Anyway, another weak part of this list is the mana base, since they have only 19 lands due to the presence of Cleansing Qualifier. And usually in Boros you prefer to run something like 21 lands plus a couple of bounce land, and here they have only 2 copies of Boros Garrison. I always liked having the full set of Boros Garrison because Boros Garrison is kind of a form of card advantage, especially when you are mulliganing, and having one bounce land in your hand allows you to put on the bottom when you're scrying more lands to keep more spells. And a weak spot of this deck has always been to not have enough card advantage when you don't have Experimental Synthesizer, and the Mardu list is trying to cover that part by playing both Closing Warfare and Deadly Dispute. Okay, that's reasonable, but I think that when it comes to the Mardu synthesizer list, I think I prefer always the Lost on Kato deck list because it doesn't play Cleansing Wildfire, but instead it plays both Traveling Inspector and the Gate package. So they have a better mana base because they're still running Navigator's Compass, but they also play the Gates, so they can fix their mana in 2 different ways. And from my point of view, it's just better. Okay, another weak part of the previous Mardu list with the Cleansing Warfare package is that it's also weaker to cards like Death Dust. So in the mirror match, you probably are better positioned if you're playing the Mardu synthesizer list with Basilisk Gate. I'm not sure. I don't really play much Boros or Mardu nowadays. So the other decks, or rather the four most played decks in Pauper right now, are basically all decks running a lot of card advantage, at least well, Dimir Tempo and Kogate maybe not, but both Affinity and Burn are running a huge amount of card advantage. Let's compare to the versions of these decks that were played a couple years ago. In example, Cooler Burn is now not running anymore cards like Red Bolt, Term Alchemist, Curse of the Pierced Earth, or similar, and instead they're running a Metalcraft package in form of their Epicure, the Great Furnace, Lance, Chromatic Star, and Experimental Synthesizer as well. And alongside Experimental Synthesizer, which is a form of card advantage, they also run Reckless Impulse, so they have 8 copies of Divination, and they're able to play both the very aggressive gameplay that deck is supposed to do, but also a longer game. Example, I were playing Furries in the last Twitch streaming, and I faced Born, and I lost to Born in very longer game when we were eventually able to win only by net decking the opponent deck. And then I lost only because my opponent killed all my relevant creatures, and I weren't able to find the fourth copy of Lightning Bolt in the first 50 cards of my deck. So truly unlucky, but if Burn is able to grind out decks like Spirits or Affinity or Boros, just means that Burn is able to play a longer game pretty enough. And they're also running Curator Birth alongside Monastery's Whisper, Modern Epicure, and most lists are also trying to get a sort of advantage from the singleton copy of Goblin Bushwalker, but I think I don't really like Goblin Bushwalker in this deck. Eventually, I prefer the 4th copy of Castle Flamberger, or the 2nd copy of Fire Blast, or yeah, another land, because maybe 17 lands aren't too much, as they prefer to hit all their land drops just to be able to play the spells they are exile with Reckless Impulse or Experimental Synthesizer. Well, whatever, the deck is good and seems to be well positioned in the metagame, since it probably has a good matchup against Affinity, Dimir Tempo, and well, against Azerius Gilgit, maybe it's not, because they play both Sugar Cat and Prismatic Strands. But if you don't have enough life gain and answers to your reward, probably you aren't able to win against them. And for that reason, cards like Unexpected Thanks are also played in the main deck of decks like Dimir Tempo or Dimir Terror, whatever. And it's kind of weird of this deck evolved, but the deck seems truly powerful, even though they have a weird mana base compared to the other versions of Dimir Tempo or Dimir Angler decks, because they aren't playing any Ash Barras or Fetch lands, even though they're playing 4 copies of Brainstorm, but they play 4 copies of Mental Note and Tuskhour, and also consider to put more cards in the graveyard just to be able to play a Thastal Iron Terror or Gurmag Angler. And often happens that they have a Gurmag Angler or more by turn 3, and they can put a lot of pressure on the battlefield. So basically the aggro control deck shifted more to the aggro spectrum of the deck, and probably lost part of its controlish gameplay, since they also cut Turn of the Black Rose and Stormbound Geist. But I think the deck is truly just more powerful compared to the other version, because instead of trying to do something like an aggro style gameplay plus control style game with Torn of the Black Rose. The cat all the develop secrets and Torn of the Black Rose, and the deck seems to be better. So I say that those 4 are the most played decks, but as are those 4 decks the better decks in the format right now? I mean, from my point of view, the format seems to be going around both Burn and Dimir Tempo, because they can be the two main beatdown strategies in the current Pauper metagame. And if you take a look at the challenge metagame, the format, you can see that decks like Dimir Terror and Burn are some of the 2 most played decks, alongside Serious Kogate, and sometimes Affinity doesn't show much. Not sure why, because from my point of view Affinity is still the best deck, but I think that the main reason is that most players, if they don't know who to approach the matchup against Dimir or against Mono Red with Affinity, they don't know how to win against them. By example, if you are playing one of those 4 decks, you have probably even matchup against Affinity at least, and Affinity is still weak to cards like Dust to Dust or Gorilla Shaman, and also you don't play cards like Genko Artificer or Gear Seeker Serpent, you are probably also weak to Lion Terror and Gourmet Gangler. I think that you can easily win against all these 3 decks if you play Affinity, but Affinity, you still need to run enough answers to all 3 decks. Well, you can play Static to end board wipes to win against Kogate, and you just need Hydroblast and Life Gain against Born. And probably the main reason why people aren't playing much Affinity in challenges, it may be that is Affinity right now is weaker to Born compared to the older metagames. Well, I think that we will see after these 2 events who Affinity or Born get in the top 8 or not. So, for that reason, I'm not expecting weird decks popping up in the top 8 or top 16 of events like the Paupergeddon on the Pauper Qualifier, but I think that at least for the paper metagame, so for the Paupergeddon, it's more likely to face a lot of decks that aren't well placed in the metagame. Example, Giant Cleansing Wildfire or Mono Black, both the Devotion version and the Deadly Dispute version, the one with Deadly Dispute and Canny Garden, just to say. And also decks like Burst Bully or even Ferris, you may face them because are decks that usually people truly love to play, and in a paper metagame you are likely to face more people that just want to play their pet deck. Also, maybe they don't have the players, enough time to test the newest decks, and they just try to play the deck which they have played the most, so they just add more answers to the deck they think they may face, and just try to be lucky enough. Anyway, usually the tabletop metagame tries to copy the online metagame, And currently, if you think about the online metagame, I think it is important, at least for the competitive events, I think it is important to consider only the challenge metagames and not the Magic Online Leagues metagame, because in leagues people try often to play pet decks or the fastest decks available. So nowadays Born seems to be the most played decks in the leagues, and for that reason decks that don't have enough answers to mono red Born could be like Affinity could be considered very weak in leagues. But if you take a look at the challenge metagame, when Affinity shows up, is one of the most played decks, and maybe not always, but often is also one of the deck with the better win rate. In example, having Affinity as the most played decks, but having still having the one of the something like 50 or more percentage wear it. An example, 10 copies of Affinity as the second most played deck, a tournament with only 60 players, and still the deck having 60% of win rate over all the decks is pretty high. In this challenge, the October 29th, Affinity took down both the first and the second place, and Affinity also placed another copy in the top 8, so Affinity is still great as deck, and you know, you may want to be prepared to face both all these 4 decks specifically, and then you may also want to have a reasonable matchup against Boros, which okay, yeah, they can also kill you with the burn damage. So right now we don't really have any control deck available in the format beside Colgate probably. So Colgate is kind of the deck that people that use it to play Jeskai Ephemerate or Zeus Familiar, they may be likely to play, because it's kind of a control combo deck where the control part is Counterspell and Journey to Nowhere, and the combo part is Basilisk Gate plus Guardian of the Guildpact, and the deck seems to be well placed against Born and Dimir Terror, because they have Sacred Cat, in example, and they can pump it with Basilisk Gate, and they can also kill the 5/5 with Journey to Nowhere, or there's also, well, not in this list specifically, but there's the 2 mana instant speed spell Destroy Eagle that can kill both Gurmag Angler and Tolarian Terror, and they can also block the Tolarian Terror or Gurmag Angler with Guardian of the Guildpact. That's the reason why often the Tolarian Terror decklists try to play cards like Agony Warp or Chinar's Edict to destroy the Guardian of the Guildpact, or Kenku Artificer animated land, because you can animate an indestructible bridge from Horizon 2, and the bridge then become a free indestructible creature. It also flies, so you can just block at Libitum and then kill your opponent with a couple of Galvanic Blast or Makeshift Foundation, so pretty strong. And also the presence of decks like Colgate and Dimir Terror forced Affinity to play main deck cards like Cast Down or Chinar's Edict. Well, also, there's Counterspell in this list, but a lot of deck lists aren't playing Counterspell, and they prefer to play Metallic Rebuke over Counterspell, because Rebuke costs only 1 mana compared to Counterspell, and it requires only 1 blue mana, so it's always better in the early game. Counterspell slow down a lot of Affinity most times, so that it may be the reason to not play Counterspell over Rebuke. Whatever, just play the card you think is better. Most times decks like Colgate, Dimir Control, and Affinity have a lot of variance in their deck list, because you can play all these 3 decks in a very large variety of ways, so just play the deck in the way you think you are playing it better. Okay, I think that I said enough. I mean, I wanted to say something more specific probably, but you know, usually when I start talking, I just put a lot of stuff, and uh, I lost always my thought on the process. So I just say goodbye to you right now, and next week I think I'll record a video about Dimir Temple, and it will just focus on Dimir Temple. So we will start by seeing the first list with Teller of Secrets, Gourmet Angler, and discover the other one when Gourmet Angler was printed, and then we will see all the versions that were played off the deck till the current one with Laren Terror. So, bye.